Hi, I'm Leah Komaiko. I'm a brand strategist to some of the largest brands in the country. I'm also a best-selling children's book author. Today on the show, we're going to talk about how the first book that you can ever remember being read to you may have implanted in you the true story, the authentic version of who you are today, your brand strategy, your best powers, and how to carry that forward. We're also going to talk about a simple strategy that I learned from children, how to do that will keep you going now and ongoingly as you wish. It's very profound. And finally, we're going to talk about the courage to be simple in a really complex world.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. All right. You're probably aware at this time there's a lot of controversy over children's books. Some books are even being banned in certain states. Let me ask you a question. How much impact do children's books have on us as adults? And do we really need to be concerned? Or is actually there is a bigger message? Do they change our value systems? Do they impact our leadership and our purpose? Well, that is the vast and intriguing path we're going down for the next 2 episodes with our special guest. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. As always, we need your help in staying relevant. So please do us a favor. Get over to wherever you tune into the podcast, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. It really helps, and we really appreciate it. It helps us to stay relevant. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's dive right in. Our guest for the next 2 episodes is Leah Komaiko. Leah is a fascinating human being whom I've gotten to meet through a very dear friend of mine, Mark Levy. He said to me, "You'll love her." And I do. Why? Well, sure, Leah is a best-selling author of no less than 20 children's books. She is a storyteller and a brand expert. It's a wild combination, and you're really going to understand why it's a powerful combination as we move forward. And yes, she has helped founders, CEOs, entrepreneurs recognize and lead from their original stories. Leah has worked with leaders and companies like Disney, McDonald, and founders of companies including Cliff Bar Philosophy and Four Seasons Restaurant in New York. She is a powerhouse and an intriguing delight. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome Leah Komaiko. And the crowd goes wild, young lady.
I love it. Thank you so much. I like a wild crowd.
Good. So let's jump in. Tell me, I know because you and I have discussed it, we've had some lovely conversations beforehand about what it is that drives human beings. And I think that oftentimes we miss really taking a look for ourselves at what is the origin story of what gives our life meaning. So let me ask you, what is the origin story of what gives your life meaning?
I love that question. I come from a very creative family. My parents were musicians. My brother went to Juilliard. My sister was deigned by the King of Spain because she's a dancer. And we were told that you had to be creative to go into the arts. Otherwise, if you went into business, you were going to be very boring and your life was going to be very dull and it wasn't creative. So that's kind of like my origin story to some point. the part two of the origin story is that my mother was not well most of my life. But she used to read children's books to me when I was growing up. And when she would read kids' books to me, she became a different person. And she was very healthy and very alive. And those books resonated with me. So I landed up writing a lot of books for kids and realizing out of that there's a lot of kids that need to be saved, so to speak, but they're usually over the age of 30 and working in businesses.
Yes, that's very true. So that's an interesting piece. You just said that. So your mom was she quite sick?
My mom was quite ill a good part of my life. My mother was brilliant. She was kind of like in another world. She was lovely. She had a lot of health problems. I think she had depression from having too many kids, but she loved reading to me. And when she read to me, she became somebody very solid and strong and healthy in my life.
So would she narrate, or would she change characters, or was she sort of into the whole thing?
She was so into it. She was just so into it that it was like when she read, and these are like books like in the, older kids' books. They're not like the ones that are whatever they were. The point is when she read, it was like my whole world came to life. That was the only time that I really felt like I understood who my mother was. And I started looking at kids' books very differently. It's
very interesting to me because you've said a couple of things that I want to pick up on. First of all, that she came to life. I feel like we've lost the art of reading, or we're losing the art of reading, particularly in the most recent generations. But there is some adventure that happens to us as the reader, as we're propelled into a different world.
Yeah.
And that in itself is fascinating. But what I find even more fascinating is you got a different mother when she read to you. That for me is really fascinating, because in your brain is this woman who is a sickly human being who is, for whatever reasons, who suddenly is transformed as a human being in front of her own child. And then what you said to that was you feel like there are a lot of kids who need to be saved, who are 30, 40 plus whatever years old in business. And so when I come back to this question around your origin story, I wonder, and this is me projecting, I wonder how your mom saved you in that family of, like you said, there was a lot of kids in that family, how she saved you via those stories.
What a great question. She saved me because the world looked pretty bleak to me before that. So when she would read to me, the world of a child's book became so vivid to me. It was like it was just, I don't think I would have learned how to read if it wasn't for the fact that my mother read to me those books. I really don't. Even though I was a good student, I'm smart enough. I don't think I would have learned how to read, and I landed up being with, as I've talked to you about, I've been with over 100,000 children in schools across America. And then I've presented also to a lot of grown-ups. But being with 100,000 kids sitting on gymnasium floors with nowhere to go, I learned so much about our brands. And the two of those things just started coming together for me.
So let's go to that, because it seems like a massive jump to probably most leaders listening in. Here's this woman who was clearly saved by children's stories, who was written, is it 20? I think it's 20, right? Yeah. 20 children's books, who obviously is still working hard to make the difference in the lives of children, but you're this icon in the branding world, working with massive organizations, like I said, the ones I named in the beginning, like McDonald's and famous organizations. it seems like so like very different worlds. Talk to us about how those worlds started to come together for you, how you sort of pulled those things, particularly as a family who said, don't go into business, because you've managed to marry the two things.
Yeah.
Tell us how it began.
Well, I got a book deal, and I always wanted to write kids' books, and I finally got a book deal, and I got a 3-book deal with a company in New York. And so I moved to New York. And when I moved to New York, it didn't dawn on me that I was going to actually have to really bring in a lot more money than I was going to make off of writing books. So I figured I better come figure out what I'm going to do so I can live here. And I started realizing in my mind, in my thinking, because I always liked business, I thought there's really not that much difference between a business idea and a children's book idea. There can't be. I didn't see it. So I realized connect those connections, and I just started talking to people. Well, I connected with somebody from a correspondent for one of the networks. And I said, can I just show you something that I do, like a little game that I've been playing? And she goes, yeah. And I showed her, and she said, okay, I got somebody you got to go see immediately. And you know how that is. So she sent me over to a guy that had started one of the first really well-known executive conference centers in New York. So she sent me in to see this guy. He said, I'll tell you what, because he had like Tom Peters there and all these people in there. Going, I'm here, you know, I don't know what I'm doing. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'll see you. If I think you're any good, I'll pay you. And if not, you know, there's the door. I said, fine.
Sure.
Fair enough. So anyway, he paid me. And what happened was that I watched this man become his real self in our conversation. He was so excited about not having to hold up the facade, and not facade is not the
persona.
Right word. The persona, to not have to be thinking just from his head, to realize that somebody actually wanted to hear who he really was, who wasn't a therapist or something, you know, that's not what I do. And he put together this whole outline and the notes afterwards that he sent out to his team. And I got to see how he struggled with just letting himself go, you know. But then I kept up with him and other people he was involved with. And so little by little, I got the guts to, you know, keep asking people if I could do this for them. I don't know what kept me doing it, but and discovered that I could make money doing this. So
let's dive into that a little bit, because you discovered you could make money doing this, but we don't know what this is yet. So, yes. Right. So this is very intriguing, because here's this children's author who has these business ideas. You've gone over to this place, you know, like you said, where famous leadership people like Tom Peters are, and this person suddenly is transformed. In fact, I would say, in using my language, that you safely collapsed the persona of that individual and had them reveal themselves, right?
Yeah.
Which, you know, I know many leaders struggle with. Like, we talk about authenticity, and they're all like, you know, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to let it go. And it's like, well, how do I be more authentic? Well, it's like, you have a problem if you ask that question, right? Because you don't even know you. So you managed to come up with a structure that allowed that. So let's take a look inside of that box.
Okay. So what I do is, because I realized this for myself one day, I realized what this one book was that had completely not only changed my life out of the many, and I have a huge library of, but it not only had changed my life, but it was who I was from the beginning of my life. Like, if I looked at the trajectory of my career and what I stood for and everything, it was in that character, it was in the story, it was in all those things. And that was mind-blowing and really humbling. It's like, you mean it's in this Dr. Seuss book and not in everything that I've learned? So what I do with people is I start by asking them if they can tell me the first kids book they remember being read to them as a child.
So let's put a pause there for a second, because I went through this exercise with you and it was fascinating. But like, you and I talked about this, initially it's like, I don't know. I have no idea. I can't remember the first book that was read to me. And I think that most people struggle with even remembering any parts of their childhood, let alone the first book. How do you get them over that part? Because there's probably people going, I don't know. Before we go any further, I don't know. So I want to put a pause there because I want people to not drift off and go, well, it's not used for me because I can't remember. Hold on a second, because Leah got me there pretty damn fast.
Well, first of all, I hear things very differently. I just start by saying, I hear people like they're 6 years old sometimes. Not like, I hear, it's not like I'm seeing voices or anything. I'm not like really into the inner child stuff. I don't even know what that means, quite frankly. But I just assume that everybody's has a story that has affected them and shaped them. And I know lots of people. I've talked to people who are like, I can't do this. I don't know what it means. I've talked to people people tell me my parents never read to me, but one person, one of my favorites was an executive who said, I used to watch Kurosawa movies when I was a kid. That's what I remember as a Kurosawa movie, this violent Japanese stuff. And I said, great, that's the story. But I will hear that story within this person. I don't really know how I do this, but I will hear the story within that person, and it represents their leadership. It represents all of these different things. And I have such regard for children's books and that voice, because I've written 20 books like this. I have such regard for children's voices, and I have such, maybe it's a mental illness. I don't think so, but
your ability is a mental illness.
Well, that one down. Other people have made millions by being mentally ill. So,
sure.
But I have a great appreciation for that little story inside people, and real respect for it. And I just have a way of, as somebody said, you totally just disarmed me. This was somebody who is, I didn't think I could. It's not that I didn't think I could get through to them. It's just I didn't think I was going to even want to talk to me. I just when I start talking to people, I hear the story, and I hear them pure, and I hear them like they're one of the 100,000 children that I've been with,
Sure.
Or one of the books that I've written. And that's what I listen for. But at the same time, I'm very strategic. I mean, I was a marketing director. I work with all different kinds of companies. So it's this weird balance. But if somebody says, I have no idea what was read to me, and some people weren't read, we just keep going until we find something else. It's a story that impressed them. Because
so there's an initial story that was read to you, but you may not have been read to. That's possible. But there is an original story that impacted you.
Yeah.
And as you said, it might have been through Japanese anime or whatever it was, but something got in there.
Something got in there. And when people remember what it is, and often they will say, okay, I know what, they'll come to me and they say, okay, I know what my book is. I know what my first book was. I said, that's not my question. My question is, what's the first book you remember having read to you? But a lot of people will come prepared because they're like, I'm ready, which is kind of cool. But when I hear this story that was wedged in there, like a brand, and a brand kind of like sticks. It's very similar to kids' books. It's like a kid's classic. It sticks in your memory. You don't really know why. You don't really know why it's the one you pick off the shelf every time. You just do. That's what happens. It lodges in you, and then we forget about it. We educate over it. We become successful over it. All the stuff that we do. But the great when people get a sense of what their great story is. I've seen shifts happen and things happen that are really wonderful.
So you said you had a conversation with somebody you didn't think you'd get through. Can you walk us through that story a little bit, just to have people like grasp what happens?
Yeah. Let me think first. Well, I think it was, okay, I'll tell you a story of some sitting next to somebody on an airplane. This is the first thing that comes to mind. And he had just come back from a big conference or something. He was pretty, he was a high level somebody or other. And he was clicking away on his desktop the whole time, or laptop the whole time. And finally, he just turned to me like, he was, he said, he told me he had done a tour of duty in Iraq or something. And then he just turned to me and said, "What do you do for a living, by the way?" And he had been talking a lot about this meeting he had come from. I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. Can you tell me your brand story for your company?" And he stopped and he thought about it. And he said, I think it's something like, exceed expectations or something, like some kind of, like thing.
Lame.
Something like something lame. Yeah. And I said, okay. I said, well, just out of curiosity, I said, can you tell me the first children's book that you remember ever being read to you? Now I'm sitting next to this guy. And he looked at me like, of course, like I was from the moon.
Of course. Yeah.
And then he looked at me again and he said, Danny and the dinosaur. Like he clicked his fingers and he went, Danny and the dinosaur. And I don't have like boilerplate questions at all. Everything is just,
yeah.
So I started asking him questions and I asked him like a couple of things like, can you remember the color of the book, the cover of the book? And this guy was probably 50. And he said, I haven't seen it, since I'm a little kid. And he goes, it's brown. It's got a brown dinosaur. And he starts telling me all this stuff about the book. And I asked him about Danny. And and this guy was getting so into it, which was really, the long and short of it was, he started to realize that his best qualities, separate from the functions of his job, and his best qualities were very similar to how he felt when he was read Danny and the Dinosaur, when he was read Danny and the Dinosaur. And they were still right there. And he was so excited. I thought this guy was going to jump out of his seat. So he started typing notes to his team. We're going to change this. We're going to do that. And I see this happen. I've seen this happen a lot. I've seen people, I work with somebody who had hired in 3 different companies, people to work with them on a project, a very large brand, really lovely people. And she said, we just can't get to what this is. And so I just asked her a question. I said, do you remember a kid's book? And she said, I remember that I was reading, I like to read Alice in Wonderland, Down the Rabbit Hole. Well, as soon as she told me that, I knew exactly what the essence of the whole project was. And we could cut right through to 3 years they had put in, and that's where we started.
Fascinating. It's fascinating. I mean, like I said, you did it with me, and I want to be transparent with everybody. I want everybody to have a chance to understand this, because my first thought was nobody read a story to me, and I clearly remember nobody did. Now I don't remember. There's a lot of my childhood that's like most people is missing, but I do remember being read to at school. There was a teacher who had us all sit on the floor and he read to us, and he was a miserable old grommet. Nobody liked him. I can remember him very well. He knew my mom. I think he had taught my mom at school. That's so you can imagine how old he was, right? And for me, as a little boy who was probably 8 or 9, he was freaking ancient. He was almost mummified to a kid, right? And so, he's and he read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? And I remember being so intrigued by this story and fascinated by this story. And it was only after having my conversation with you, I went, oh my God, of course my life's journey has been what it's been, because in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which you, as you're listening, may be familiar with, they pass through this wardrobe into Narnia, into another world, into another reality. My whole freaking life has been driven by looking into other realities, whether it's in quantum physics, whether it's in metaphysics, whether it's in psychology, whether everything has been about, well, what is, the shadow self? What's behind something? What is inside? What is in that dark place? What drives the darkness into a human being? What is it that drives the light in an individual? Who is the hero and who is the savior? And sometimes it's the small person. It was like, after you done that with me, I'm like, Jesus, that shit got to me. Now, I think, and this, you please, you correct me if I'm wrong. I think that there was probably several books that I was read to, but that was the one that resonated because it was the truth of my soul, my language, not yours. It was the truth of what was true within me, that it resonated so clearly. And so what I loved about your work is it reminds us, it's really like what I felt when you were talking about it was like you remind people of what they've forgotten about, what drives them, what is in their hearts and their souls. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I kind of like, you're so eloquent. Let me see if I can make this. I think people get reunited. It's like you see these shows where I haven't seen my father in 50. It's like people are like, they get reunited with who they were when they were young, and what that did in their body, how that lodged in their body. And I was on the phone the other day with somebody who is a very, she won't mind. I won't say her name, but she's a world-renowned artist and astrologer. And, she said, let me try this with me. I said, okay. So we did it. And I said, we're talking about the book, and the book that she liked was Goodnight Moon, which is a real classic book. And she had absolutely no idea that book, Moon, she was an astrologer, that had completely opened up what she felt and showed about the world. So now since then, she's been calling me and saying, okay, I'm changing the colors of my website. I'm moving my audience this way. I was going to be, it just, when we get who we were from the beginning, when we get who we are, in a way that's playful and fun. And I don't think business was ever meant to be this fun, this hard. I just don't. Which is not to say that mine isn't a lot of the time, but which is to say, I think that coming up with ideas, when people say to me, I'm having a hard time figuring out what's next or where my ideas are, I just always dive into a kid's story, and then everything opens up for me and for them.
This is fascinating. We're already at the end of part one of the show, which is flown by. We've already done the first part. Loving having this conversation with you. I want to dive into it more because I want to have people have an opportunity to say, okay, how can I apply this to me and to our company and to our organization? We'll talk about that more in the second half. Before we do that, I want to let people know where they can find out about you, your resources, how to book you, how to engage with you, and of course, your 4,042 books that you have for sale.
Yeah, a lot of them are no longer. Only a couple of them are still.
That's okay.
Modern classics, but the other books, and they have a memoir that I wrote that is
beautiful.
Awesome. So, but the point is this: how to find me. I have a website, and everybody who wants to reach me reaches me through there. So it's my name, which is Leah, Leah, and my last name, which is KOMAIKO.com.
Fabulous. Well, we'll make sure that is posted in any notes, any other ways of connecting with Leah. We'll make sure are in the show notes so you can reach out to her through that. And we're going to be back for part 2 of this delicious conversation with my good friend, Leah. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how the original story that touched you was not changing you, but revealing you, and how you have, by nature of just living life, may have lost touch with that part, and how you can bring it back and actually use it to drive the brand of your organization. We're going to be back in just one click. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.